You never think it'll happen to you, but divorce is something many people endure for various reasons. When you trust and love your partner, you can't imagine joining the ranks of failed marriages. But looking at today's divorce rates makes you question the whole concept of marriage. That vow, "till death do us part," starts to feel meaningless over time. Its importance has diminished. Maybe I should have been more observant, not just from online stories and articles, but in my own life. Love often clouds our judgment in a positive way. Even though we had a family and a life together, the idea of growing old with someone felt unsettling. The signs were there, and I had seen them before. My upbringing eventually marked us as a single-parent household. Back then, my parents' marriage seemed strong, filled with love and respect. My father worked tirelessly, his demanding job taking its toll, but he always put our family first. Meanwhile, my mother returned to work once my younger sister started school. As kids, we were oblivious, but looking back, the signs were clear, revealing the truth. Her affair didn't start right away. It began when I was a teenager, with my brother being slightly younger and my sister 3 years younger. It played out like many secret affairs do: late nights at work, business trips, and sudden changes in appearance after meetings. Without smartphones, it was marked by clandestine calls and unexplained absences. My father discovered the affair when he came home early, hoping to surprise my mother with a special outing. She had claimed a half-day for a hairstyling appointment and shopping. Instead, he found her car in the driveway, along with another vehicle he recognized. Entering through the back, he caught her with her boss in their bed. Furious, my father confronted him, and the man, John Harrison, left our house bruised. My father quickly learned that infidelity didn't hold much weight in a no-fault divorce state. People say possession is 9/10 of the law. Trying to force her out of the house, he met resistance from my mother's family. With the house in both their names, she refused to leave. Stuck in a bind, staying put would prevent a divorce, requiring a year of separate living. Despite attempts to evict her for infidelity, it wasn't legally enforceable. No-fault divorces can seem unjust, especially when cheating leads to a split without consequences. Eventually, my father had to move out, unable to find a place for all of us. I confronted my mother, preparing to move in with him soon. My younger siblings were confused, not understanding why our father was absent. During that chaotic year, my mother kept our visits with our father, who was struggling emotionally. He confided in me that we were his only motivation. He aimed for custody and a home, a distant hope in a system biased against men. Despite my wish to live with him, custody went to my mother, as my siblings were too young to decide, leaving us in her care. One silver lining for my father was Australia's lack of alimony. While spousal maintenance exists, it's not always granted. With my mother earning well, he only had to provide reasonable support. Unlike in the US, Australian child support is fair for the non-residential parent, which spared my father from financial devastation. The next 4 years were tough. I resented my mother and made it clear to any suitor she brought home. By 16, I left her in tears. We barely spoke, and I avoided home as much as possible. After the divorce, my father found love with Grace, who was also divorced. I welcomed their relationship, and she became a caring figure in our lives. Though my father was hesitant to remarry, they lived together happily. When I turned 18, I moved out, unable to bear living with my mother. My parting words were harsh, reflecting years of frustration. Despite our strained relationship, she cried as I left. I reassured my siblings and promised to stay in touch before saying goodbye to my mother. My mother's experience made me wary of women. Knowing my own commitment to monogamy, I looked for the same in a partner after reading numerous articles about infidelity. After high school, I dated casually, searching for someone worthy of my trust and affection. At 21, while working as an engineer and taking night classes to advance, I met Megan, a recent university graduate. I met her at a corporate event where I was representing an engineering firm, and she was working part-time as a sales rep. We hit it off right away, and by the end of the day, I had her number and promised to call. "Got a hot date, Ethan?" my roommate teased. We had agreed to split expenses to save money. "Something like that," I replied. "Is this the girl from the conference?" "Yeah," I smirked. Finally mustered up the courage to call. "Back off, Ryan," I said. Just waited a couple of days so I wouldn't seem too eager. Trust me, she was thrilled when I called and eager to meet. After applying some aftershave, I felt confident and didn't want to appear unkempt. Despite having a decent job, my finances were tight, but I felt comfortable. We decided to meet at a local bar and take things step by step. I usually avoided dinner on first dates to avoid the free meal scenario. As I walked into the bar, I saw her on a stool, already enjoying her drink. When I walked into the bar, I saw her perched on a stool, already sipping her drink. Her eyes lit up when she noticed me, and my heart started racing. As we chatted over drinks, we opened up to each other. She revealed that her temporary position at the corporation was due to her looks, which unfortunately attracted unwanted attention from married men. This really disgusted her, and I totally got her frustration. While I was already aware of my mother's infidelity, I realized that cheating isn't confined to one gender. Online statistics shocked me with how many both men and women admitted to affairs. Articles in Australia painted us as notorious cheaters. "You were a perfect gentleman," she said, squeezing my hand. "You kept eye contact and were so professional until you asked for my number. You were genuine. I just wish you were single." I reassured her of my single status, backed up by my friends. She smiled, showing her trust despite having been hurt in the past. We decided to take it slow at first, meeting for coffee or drinks during the first few weeks. On our third night out, we shared our first kiss over drinks, both of us aware of each other's family backgrounds. It felt right, and we both felt it. Soon, our casual drinks turned into dinner dates, and within a week, we made love for the first time at my apartment. A month later, she told me she loved me, and I felt the same way. Despite my father's past, Megan had truly won my heart. As Megan found a stable job, we began discussing serious topics like living together, buying a house, and starting a family. We decided to buy a house together before getting married, luckily avoiding the housing boom in Australia. However, due to her poor credit history, she couldn't co-borrow on the mortgage. My father stepped in as a co-borrower, which was a huge relief. Megan was deeply thankful to him, and her parents really liked me. 3 months after moving into our new home, I proposed, and our engagement and wedding plans were met with excitement. Marrying Megan was the happiest day of my life. We exchanged vows in a park, surrounded by loved ones, both of us beaming with joy as we committed to each other. Our honeymoon on a Pacific island revealed that Megan was pregnant. 9 months later, our beautiful daughter was born, followed by a son 18 months later. Deciding 2 children were enough, she opted for birth control instead of surgery. She balanced motherhood with part-time work until the kids were in middle school, then returned to full-time work. By our mid-40s, I was a regional manager for engineering firms, frequently traveling. Megan ran her own real estate office and occasionally visited the CBD headquarters. Our daughter moved out to live with her boyfriend, while our son pursued university studies. Married for over 20 years, our love remained strong. Although I could appreciate other women, my heart was always with Megan, and I never cheated. My father's experience always lingered in my mind. I should have been more vigilant, noticed the signs earlier. When I finally faced the truth, I knew I had to brace myself for the worst. "Do you think she's cheating?" Ryan asked, his surprise evident. "Buddy, she adores you," I said, feeling naive. I hoped our relationship would improve once Alex left, but her behavior is reminding me of my mother's. The thought of my mother's infidelity made my blood boil. Over the past 2 decades, I barely interacted with her. She came to my wedding only because my father insisted. Now married to Grace and retired, he encouraged me to invite her, and I did, reluctantly, feeling pressured not to appear as the villain. Other than occasional texts about her rarely seen grandchildren, I kept my distance. Megan understood and didn't push for a relationship with her either. "What's your plan?" Ryan asked. "Gather evidence and leave her if she's cheating," I replied. "How?" he inquired. "I have my methods. Lately, she's been unusually secretive. It's my fault for trusting her. I'm preparing for the worst. I'm meeting with a private investigator on Monday to confirm my suspicions. No need for photos, just evidence. It's unfortunate that you can't divorce for infidelity here, true, but early action can help." Thankfully, she waited until the kids were grown. "Also, there are details she's overlooked that might help," he said, sympathizing as he patted my shoulder. "I'm sorry, buddy," he added. "I feel the same way," I confessed, taking a sip of my beer. "I can't stop loving her until I'm sure. Maybe I'm just paranoid, but the signs are there." The next morning, I visited my dad. Seeing my troubled expression, he offered me a beer with patience. He and Grace, still deeply in love, reminded me of their enduring bond. Although their initial relationship was brief, Dad wanted Grace as his wife. "I suspect Megan's having an affair," I sighed. Dad muttered, "Not again. I'll hire a PI on Monday," I said. "The signs are clear, Dad. They're the same signs you mentioned about Mom. It seems Megan's read a manual on how to avoid detection, but I've woken up to it." "What's the plan?" Grace asked, sensing my grim mood. "I'll transfer the house to you, Dad. Megan's name isn't on the mortgage. Legally, we own it. When I'm gone, she'll be a tenant. I'll gift you the house by removing my name from the deed according to state and federal law." "Then what?" Grace inquired. "We'll sign a lease after the divorce. I'll outline how to legally evict her if necessary. I've thought this through. Megan knew our terms on fidelity. If she breaks them, she's out. No alimony or support, thankfully. I won't fund a cheater." I took another sip of my beer, feeling frustrated. I hope I'm wrong. When I got home, Megan was lounging on the couch, greeting me warmly. "Where were you?" Megan asked as I walked in, her tone casual but her eyes searching. "Just had a chat with Dad about some work stuff," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My suspicions about her were eating away at me, but without hard evidence, I couldn't be sure. If she was cheating, it wasn't with someone she saw every day. The possibility of sudden girls' nights or unexplained absences loomed in my mind. Despite her reassurances of love, doubts kept creeping in. The thought of her being unfaithful was unbearable, but without proof, I had to place my trust in her, though warily. Monday arrived, and I followed my usual routine. Despite our morning interactions being warm and familiar, I had plans to meet a private investigator during my lunch break to begin surveillance on Megan. After 20 years of marriage, it was unsettling to be in this position, as if I were living in one of those old detective stories. At the meeting, the PI, a pragmatic woman, explained the process and associated costs. "Will she notice the money movements?" I asked. "No," she assured me. "We have separate accounts, but we share one for bills." "Why suspect an affair?" she asked, leaning forward. I detailed my mother's infidelity, my father's discovery, and the current issues. "How's your intimate life?" she probed. "It started well after our son left, but things have slowed down significantly in the past 6 months. I would prefer more closeness if possible," I explained. "Have you noticed any behavioral changes?" she continued. "Yes, there have been subtle shifts, enough to raise suspicion. It's not a full-scale crisis, but there are red flags," I admitted with a wry smile. She described the surveillance options, including phone tapping and in-person monitoring, noting that some methods could be legally complicated. I made it clear that I wasn't looking for long-term solutions unless I was entirely blind. I just needed to know the truth. I had decided to initiate surveillance the following week. It was hard to forego intimacy and trust when I wasn't even sure if she was being unfaithful. I could have pretended to be ill, but I chose to face the situation honestly. I wasn't interested in her advances, which likely confused her. She asked if work was stressing me out, and I confirmed it. She reassured me of her love as always. By Wednesday, I set the plan in motion. Despite my inner turmoil, I knew I had to prepare for the worst. I immersed myself in research about cheating spouses and started preparing an evacuation plan. I packed an evacuation bag and moved some belongings to the car, ready to act at a moment's notice. With the house now legally in my father's name, Megan would soon find herself alone if things continued. It was a typical Friday evening when I arrived home. Normally, Megan would be in the living room, relaxing with TV and wine. We would order takeout, catch up on our week, and enjoy each other's company. But tonight was different. I heard her bustling in the bathroom, a cliché move that made me uneasy. I grabbed a beer and sat on the couch in the dim light, waiting for her to emerge. When she did, she looked stunning, dressed in a colorful blouse, a short skirt, stockings, and heels. Her hair and makeup were perfect. But this wasn't for me. It took a moment for me to piece it all together. "Oh, Ethan, I didn't realize you were home," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "I got home at my usual time." "Megan, you're dressed up." "Got plans?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. She hesitated, then said, "I have a date tonight with John from work." "Just a work event?" I inquired, already knowing it was a lie. John was her affair partner, someone I knew from her company's head office. He was a married man with kids around our children's age. I wasn't sure what she expected from me. If she thought I'd beg or plead, she didn't know me at all. I stood up, meeting her gaze as I approached. She flinched, and I smiled, walking past her toward the kitchen. "Aren't you going to say anything, Ethan?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "No," I replied. She had no idea how prepared I was. We were both skilled at pretending, but I wasn't going to continue the charade. "Fair enough. I'll be back later." "We'll talk then," she said, heading towards the door. I didn't respond but followed her to the entrance. She glanced back with a mix of apprehension and defiance. Whether it was guilt or something else, I didn't care anymore. "Good night, Ethan," she murmured. "Goodbye, Megan," I said firmly. She probably understood the gravity of my silence. Maybe she thought I would tolerate it like other men, but I wasn't going to be one of those men. I refused to accept an open marriage or any form of betrayal. It undermines everything marriage stands for. Once she left, I sprang into action. I grabbed my evacuation bag and another suitcase, loading them into the car. With modern technology, I managed everything online or via phone apps. I settled our debt, paid off the credit card, and canceled it. I transferred most of our joint savings into my account, leaving her with a couple of months' worth of expenses. With the house in my name, she would soon realize she was on her own. Walking through our home, now tainted with memories, I took a sip of my beer. I had 3 important calls to make, one simple and the other 2 more challenging. "Dad, she's confirmed it. She admitted to going on a date tonight." "The plan starts now. Where are you heading?" he asked. "Adelaide. I've lined up a new job there for a year after the divorce. Then I'll move back to Sydney." "That's the plan, understood. I'll keep your location confidential. Need a new number, sorting it out on arrival. We'll send my address. Drive safe and stay smart," Dad said. "Dad, I'm just leaving a cheater." "It feels like history is repeating itself," I replied, feeling a mix of frustration and resignation. "You've done nothing wrong, Ethan." find peace and move on. We love you, he reassured me. Kids, not yet, I said. Thanks, Dad. I'll talk to you soon. Calling my children was the hardest part. I reached out to my daughter first. Her reaction was heart-wrenching. She cried as she heard the news, and I did my best to reassure her of my love and support, even though I was leaving for now. I promised to send her updates through email. My son took the news with more stoicism, though he was visibly upset. He called his mother a cheat without hesitation and only asked what my plans were. I told him I intended to be honest with his mother's wife, but it wasn't about revenge. Alex, this is real life, not some fictional story. I'm heartbroken, but I'm just waiting for the divorce and then trying to rebuild my life. I'll be 46 when it happens. Can she demand counseling? Our marriage and divorce laws are different from those stories based on state laws. As long as we've lived apart for 12 months, I can file for divorce. I won't even have to attend court, though I'll go just to ensure everything is handled correctly. She can't demand counseling after 20 years of marriage. Be careful, Dad advised. You know how tricky the courts can be. If she's persistent enough, just present the evidence to the counselor and ask if they would stay married to someone who's been unfaithful, okay, Dad? I'll keep you updated once I arrive. I know Mom will be in touch, and Lottie will look after you, I said. Thanks, Alex. We'll talk soon. With that, I left Megan a brief note, informing her of my departure and that my father would contact her. I didn't provide any explanations, letting it be a surprise. I also notified our children as my father had done. If her parents inquired, I'd share proof if necessary. I left my wedding ring on the coffee table with the note and copies of the evidence, keeping the originals. Driving away from the house, I felt a strange sense of relief. I checked into a hotel outside the city and spent the next 2 weeks exploring small towns on my way to Adelaide. Once there, my new colleagues welcomed me and showed me around. I chose a modern apartment in North Adelaide, opting to rent rather than buy due to high property prices. My plan was to return to Sydney after a year. Once settled, I updated my family on my new address. Emily called immediately, eager to visit. I missed her dearly, so I arranged for her to fly over for a month. My son, finishing up his studies, planned to visit for Christmas, which was only 3 months away. Meanwhile, Dad kept me informed about Megan's reaction. Did you know she didn't come home until the next morning? He asked. Yes, I know, I replied. I had chosen not to interfere with the private investigators' work. They went to dinner, had a romantic evening, and spent the night at a city hotel, he informed me. Satisfied with this, I thanked the investigators and settled their fees, as their services were no longer needed. Dad later told me about Megan's reaction when she discovered the note, evidence, and my absence. She called hysterically and contacted our children and her family, but I ignored her calls and marked her emails as spam. A week later, I confronted Megan with the lease and house ownership documents. She realized the situation was legally binding and had 3 months to find a new home or face eviction by the police. Despite still living there, Dad sensed she was planning to move out. Has she inquired about me? I asked. Certainly, Dad replied. She's asked about your family, the kids, your friends, even your workplace. She's consumed by guilt over discarding your 20-year bond. Has she offered any explanation? I asked. Not really, he said. She's remorseful, but it's the same old story as your mother's. She's sorry for getting caught, not for the affair. Cheaters often live in denial, thinking they're blameless. They claim it was just physical, but they never admit to the emotional betrayal. Even when I had offers in my 30s and 40s, I stayed true to my vows because I loved your mother. Now, I've found love again with Grace. Ethan, take time to heal and grieve your marriage. When you're ready, welcome someone new into your life. There are countless good women out there. Thanks, Dad. Love you, I said. Look after yourself, he replied. Work became my refuge, keeping me occupied with trips across South Australia to visit stores and suppliers. I spent weekends exploring the Barossa Valley. The divorce had transformed me into a tough negotiator, unwilling to compromise unless it benefited my company. Fortunately, my bosses were pleased with my performance and suggested I might consider staying in Adelaide permanently. A month after settling into my apartment, my daughter visited. At the airport, she ran into my arms with a joyful shout of "Daddy." We spent a week together, making the most of our time despite my work commitments. During our conversations, she revealed that Megan had been bombarding her with calls, trying to justify her actions. Reluctantly, I showed her the evidence I had. As she read through it, tears streamed down her face, and she expressed her anger toward her mother. Although I assured her of her mother's love, I worried it would take a long time, if ever, for her to forgive Megan. The day Emily left was painful for both of us. She wanted to stay longer for my sake, and we embraced tightly, knowing it would be a while before we'd see each other again. As she drove away, I couldn't hold back my tears, realizing the depth of my loneliness. Her visit had rejuvenated me, and I found comfort in our nightly conversations, frequent calls from my son, and promises of support from my siblings. My father kept me updated on Megan's activities, while old colleagues from Sydney reached out for casual chats and laughter, offering a semblance of comfort amidst the turmoil. About 6 weeks before Christmas, lightning struck once more. As I wandered through the aisles of the nearby supermarket, I found myself lost in boredom. Grocery shopping had once been a joyful activity with Megan, filled with laughter and playful banter. Reaching for a bottle of salad dressing, I accidentally bumped into another shopper reaching for the same item. Our eyes met in surprise. "I think I startled you," I said apologetically. "No, my fault entirely." "I didn't see you there," she replied. "Please, take the bottle." "I'll find something else, but it's the last one," I said, feeling an unexpected spark of boldness. "How about this? You take the bottle, and we grab coffee afterward." I extended my hand, feeling an intriguing warmth from her touch. "I'm Ethan," I introduced myself. Her smile brightened her face as she responded, "I'm Sarah." As we shook hands, I was struck by her soft skin and captivating beauty. "Do you often meet men in supermarkets?" I asked, a hint of amusement in my voice. "No, you're the first," she chuckled. "And are you single?" "If not, I'll retract my invitation." "But if you are, I hope you'll accept." Sarah had shoulder-length brunette hair and wore thin-rimmed black glasses that highlighted her bright blue eyes and small nose. With full, natural lips and a classically beautiful face, she was striking. I couldn't quite guess her age, though I estimated she was about 6 inches shorter than me. Her smile suggested she was pleased with the encounter. "I'd love to grab coffee," she said. "Can I have your number?" After exchanging numbers, she texted, "I'll finish shopping in about half an hour, then head home to put things away. But I can meet you in a couple of hours if you'd like." "Are you local?" I asked. "Yes, I live nearby," she replied. "Same here. I avoid long drives just for groceries." "Let me know where you'll be, and I'll meet you there." As she moved her cart ahead, she rested a hand on my forearm. "See you soon, Ethan." It's been too long since I've had a date. At the coffee shop, I caught the undertone in her voice and noticed the pain mirrored in her eyes, a reflection of my own struggles. "I'll text you once I'm home and let you know where to find me," she said. Finishing my shopping, I hurried home, put everything away, showered, and changed. I texted Sarah about meeting at a nearby coffee shop I enjoyed, and she responded that she frequented the same spot, wondering if we'd crossed paths before. I felt a flutter of nerves waiting for her. Although I had dated my wife throughout our marriage, this was my first real date in 20 years. When Sarah arrived, she looked stunning in a sundress, perhaps a bit overdressed, but beautifully so. After getting our drinks, we settled into conversation. Sarah admitted she was impressed by my confidence in asking her out at the supermarket. When you touched my hand, Ethan, I felt something, she confessed, blushing but shaking her head as if to dismiss the idea. I've read about such connections, but I always thought they were just stories. As she extended her hand, we shared a smile, and when I grasped it, she whispered, I felt it again, definitely from my side. We didn't dive deeply into our personal histories on our first date. I recognized her name and noticed the remnants of a wedding ring on her bare left hand. Sarah worked as a kindergarten teacher but had no children of her own. She lived alone in a small apartment and had a few close friends. Her parents and younger sister lived in the city. She was 35 years old. Oh, I'm 45, I said. Your age doesn't matter, Ethan. What matters is the kind of person you are, she reassured me. I took this opportunity to admit my recent breakup. Seeing her anxious expression, I suggested another drink, sensing she needed more explanation. Despite my hesitation to share everything on a first date, Sarah surprised me by saying, No, Ethan, I trust you for now. I can see you're hurting. Is it that obvious? I have seen the same look in the mirror, she confessed, taking my hand for comfort. It gets easier day by day. Eventually, the person who broke your heart won't matter anymore. And then perhaps you'll meet someone who helps mend it. It may take time, but it happens. My father always said the same thing, I remarked. Your dad's got some wisdom, she agreed with a reassuring smile. After finishing our second glass, we headed outside. Approaching her car, I felt uncertain about whether to kiss her, hug her, or just say goodbye. I opted for a hug and found myself reluctant to let go. The intensity of my attraction surprised me, and it seemed she felt the same way. Neither of us wanted to break the embrace. Give me a ring this week, Ethan. I'd love to chat again, she said. How about tonight? I suggested, and her giggle tugged at my heartstrings. Feel free to call anytime, she replied. That night, and every night after, I dialed her number. I suggested Friday for dinner to avoid disrupting her teaching schedule. When she agreed, I couldn't contain my excitement, practically dancing around my apartment after we hung up. At Thursday's conference, my upbeat mood sparked curiosity among my colleagues, who assumed I was seeing someone. To avoid jinxing it, I mentioned my coffee shop date and upcoming dinner, stating I preferred dating one woman at a time. For our dinner date, I chose a restaurant with stellar reviews, dressed smartly despite its casual vibe, eager for what the future held. When I walked into the restaurant, I spotted Sarah immediately. She looked a little nervous but brightened up when she saw me. I leaned in and gave her a kiss, which she returned with surprising eagerness. Wow, she said with a grin, if that's how you greet me, I'm excited for what's next. We slid into a cozy booth, and our conversation flowed easily. We shared appetizers and desserts, and before we knew it, hours had passed. The meal was delicious, and the service was impeccable but discreet. After finishing, I suggested we move to Holland's for another drink, and Sarah eagerly agreed. At the bar, I picked a quiet spot with mellow piano music in the background. Sarah enjoyed a cocktail while I sipped on bourbon. She looked at me with curiosity and asked what was on my mind. I took that as my cue to open up. I talked about our chance meeting, our lives, and our families. I shared my father's struggles, my strained relationship with my mother, and how their divorce made me see the cracks in my own marriage. I admitted I was still technically married but separated, and in the process of finalizing the divorce. I assured her that if she saw this as cheating, I'd understand. My marriage was over, the paperwork was just a formality. I explained that I'd be going back to Sydney to finish the divorce and that if she started seeing someone in Adelaide, we'd have to talk things through. The distance from my kids in Sydney was hard, and I missed them every day. Sarah opened up about her own past. Her ex-husband had been charming but controlling. Despite her parents' warnings, she fell in love with him when she was 19, despite him being 6 years older. Over time, He isolated her from everyone she cared about, made her feel like a servant, and constantly belittled her. I stood up to him, Sarah said, her voice trembling. He took it as disrespect. If I wore something he didn't like or came home late, he'd accuse me of cheating. I felt like I was always walking on eggshells. There was never any positivity from him. I doubt he'd ever have anything good to say about you. I knew I had to get away, she continued. He was unstable, and I feared for my safety. I called my father, begging him to rescue me. He came with some friends, and they helped me leave. My ex tried to fight them off, but he was outnumbered. My father subdued him, and they helped me move out. I got a restraining order and an AWO against him. It's been 7 years, and he has no idea where I am. I've been too scared to date since then. Her eyes met mine, and I could see the depth of her pain. Then I met you, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something real. It's different from what I felt before. I noticed she seemed a bit too upset to drive, so I offered to take her home. We arrived at her apartment building, and after walking her to the door, I leaned in and gave her a tender kiss. I had a wonderful time, Sarah. I'd love to see you again this week. Any night works for me. I'm a pretty good cook. How about dinner at my place? I'll bring something too. I'm not too bad in the kitchen either, she laughed. Let's make it a cook-off. Wednesday work, perfect. And expect your usual nightly call, she asked with a playful tone. Jamesoro, how about the beach? Just to relax and have fun. That night, as I settled on the couch with a beer, I checked my phone. Had a great time tonight, Ethan. I wanted you to stay, but let's take it slow. Agreed. Bring clothes Wednesday. I'm tired of sleeping alone. Me too. My bed feels empty without you. I'm picking you up at 9 a.m. breakfast and then the beach. What's your favorite color? Usually blue. For clothes, black or red, perfect. See you then. Sweet dreams, beautiful. The next morning, Sarah hunked outside. She greeted me with a joke about needing a broom for the mess of men she'd been dealing with. After a delightful breakfast, we headed to the beach, spending the day there and cooling off in the water. Drink? I asked. Love to, but I don't want to leave, she said. Why don't you change and come back for drinks, or stay the night, she whispered. I dashed into the house, packed a bag, and hurried to her place. Out of breath, I knocked, and she laughed, pulling me inside. The next morning, she made breakfast, and we relaxed in her apartment all day. The silence between us felt comfortable and easy. No rush, Jenny, I whispered. We have all the time in the world. I realized I was falling for her, hoping it wasn't just a rebound from my recent divorce. But deep down, I wanted to believe that fate had brought us together that day in the supermarket. During the day, our texts were few due to Sarah's teaching schedule, but we talked every night. My coworkers knew I was seeing someone, and I had informed my family in Sydney about Sarah. My dad kept me updated on Megan's situation. She was close to moving out and was still searching for me. Wednesday night arrived, and Sarah had prepared a wonderful dinner. Her dessert was especially delightful. I couldn't help but chuckle as I patted my belly and said, "They say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach." Sarah leaned in, whispering, "I love you," as she kissed me softly. "I love you too," I replied with a smile. "Isn't it too soon?" she asked. "Not at all, Jenny. From our first date, I knew you were the one I wanted to spend my life with. If being closer to your kids means moving, I'm in," I assured her. "Are you sure?" she questioned. "My heart says yes," I affirmed. "Let's see how it goes." That night, Sarah visited my apartment for the first time. It was a bit bachelor-like but clean and tidy, and she understood it was just a temporary residence. When the topic of marriage came up, she blushed and turned away, her wrist gently held in mine. "Sarah, I've been thinking about it," I confessed. "I can't remember feeling this much love since Megan. It's not just because of the pain from my past, but maybe the freshness of this new beginning. I love you, Sarah Bennett. One day, I hope to call you Sarah Williams. Her eyes softened as she whispered back, I'd like that. Over the next few weeks, we were nearly inseparable, spending most nights together at her much nicer apartment. I kept my kids updated, but they wanted to meet Sarah before discussing anything further about moving. Before Christmas, I asked my son about his mother. He said she probably knew I wasn't in Sydney and added that Lottie wasn't talking to her much either. Are you sure you want to leave, Dad? My son asked. We're all considering moving closer to you. Sarah squeezed my hand in support. Think it through, Alex, my son advised. I know it's a big step, trust me, Dad, you're more important, he reassured. Sarah looked at me, surprised by my son's understanding. I still need to go back for the divorce, I reminded him. Just don't rush it, he cautioned. I know, but leaving your mother was planned, I explained. To hell with her, my son declared. Sarah accompanied me to the airport when my daughter arrived with her husband, James. Emily rushed into my arms, evoking a flood of tears as I introduced her to Sarah. The next day, my son surprised me at my apartment door, and we shared a heartfelt hug. Sarah remarked on our resemblance, though I had already confirmed paternity. Later, I drove us to Sarah's parents' house. I unloaded a trunk full of gifts, and her mother instantly adored my daughter. I was certain they welcomed my son warmly too. I video called my father to wish him a Merry Christmas while my extended family celebrated with him. Meanwhile, Megan had moved in with her parents after her affair partner was ousted and she faced job repercussions. My kids documented the day on social media, but I found little interest in it. Despite old friends reaching out, I focused on finalizing my divorce and returning to Sydney. Christmas with Sarah's family was wonderful. I surprised her with a beautiful necklace and bracelet, hinting at our future together. She was overjoyed and promised to wear them often, her eyes shining with gratitude. After a hearty lunch, her father offered me a beer, and we ended up tinkering with an old sports car in his garage. Sarah seems happier lately, Ethan. Leaving Adelaide might be good for her. Are you okay with staying here indefinitely? He asked. I'll stick around for her, and my kids will move closer, I confirmed. How soon can you finalize the divorce? Probably a few months at most. I've been honest with Sarah, I explained. I heard she's been giving you a hard time, he remarked. Yeah, it might take up to 6 months. I only recently got solid evidence, I said. He shook his head in disgust. I've heard about this cheating mess. Why get married if you can't stay faithful? Ever heard of a betrayed man syndrome? Yeah, it's messed up. Sarah's ex was both a cheater and a manipulator. What? He asked, laying a hand on my shoulder. She hardly knew about the cheating, but he was unfaithful with anyone who caught his eye. She loves you, Ethan. Just don't hurt her, he said softly. I love her more than anything in this world, I assured him. Sarah entered the room, smiling. We've both been through pain, so we support each other. We stayed until late afternoon, and my daughter drove us home. After a few drinks, Sarah and I headed to our bedroom. If the day was good, New Year's Eve was even better. I took her to a downtown hotel where we enjoyed a lovely dinner and drinks. Back in our room, champagne awaited us. Any New Year's wishes? I asked. I want us to live here together, she said. Deal, Sarah said with a soft smile, pulling me closer. And I want you to propose as soon as your divorce is finalized. I'm already eyeing some rings, she paused, then added quietly, I want us to have a baby, we'll start a family together, I promised her, feeling my heart swell with excitement. A few days later, it was time for my kids to leave. While it was hard to say goodbye, I reassured them that I might be staying in Adelaide for a while. I shared the same news with my father, who promised to visit whenever he could. The following months were a whirlwind of joy. I applied for a lease and moved in with Sarah. Our relationship wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real and fulfilling. We navigated the complexities of my divorce and the trust issues that lingered, but we committed to being open and honest with each other. Sarah's presence uplifted me, and her love motivated me to buy an engagement ring before heading back to Sydney. Sarah, who was more nervous than I during the flight, knew the challenges we faced. At the airport, my dad, siblings, and kids greeted us warmly. We'd be staying with him while the divorce was underway. I had already filed the papers, but Megan was contesting them. I haven't seen Megan in a year, I told my lawyer. I've met all the legal requirements. I've been living in Adelaide for 12 months, and she's been absent from my life, that's true, but she might still challenge the divorce, my lawyer explained. But no judge will take her claim seriously or require counseling. Is Sarah your partner? Yes, I confirmed. And once the divorce is final, you plan to marry and start a family? My lawyer asked. Yes, Sarah chimed in. I'll accept his proposal once the divorce is finalized. We're planning a simple wedding and hoping to start a family soon after. I'll get in touch with her lawyer, my lawyer concluded. 3 days later, my lawyer informed me that Megan was willing to sign the papers, making it a joint petition. If you speak with her, the process should go smoothly, he advised. You're with Sarah now and starting a new life. Are you still angry? My dad asked. Not really. I just want to move forward, I replied. The following week, we went to court. Once Megan signed the documents, the judge would finalize our divorce. A month after receiving the decree, I hadn't seen Megan since her departure. As we entered the courtroom with my attorney, Megan looked shocked to see me with another woman. I made sure Sarah was comfortable, holding her hand and letting her lean on my shoulder. When it was time to address Megan, she appeared worn out. I had heard that her life had deteriorated since I left, but I felt no sympathy. She had made choices that cost her everything. She was estranged from our daughter, and our son barely communicated with her. My family had cut ties, and even her family had been disappointed but reluctantly accepted her after my father kicked her out. Speak up, Megan. Let's get this over with so I can move on with my life. You're a part of my past, I said firmly. Who is she? Megan asked quietly. That's Sarah Bennett. Once the divorce is finalized, I'm going to propose to her. She'll soon be Sarah Williams, I stated. Sarah added, I'm excited to accept his proposal. I want to be his wife and a mother to his children. Once he proposes, we'll plan a simple wedding and, hopefully, start a family. Megan's eyes filled with pain. You've moved on pretty quickly, she said. I wasn't the one who cheated, I replied. I remember finding the evidence. You never explained yourself. I left that night, and you remained silent. You didn't fight for us. I didn't need to fight because I was your husband. In the end, you weren't worth fighting for. You betrayed me, Megan. After 20 years together, you revealed your true nature. We discussed monogamy and fidelity. I warned you that if you acted like my mother, I'd leave. You made my decision easier. Do you even regret it? Don't bother answering. You don't regret it. You regret getting caught. You're just like my mother, her lawyer interjected. I must ask you to be respectful. If you can't, we'll have to ask you to leave, I glared at him. I have the right to speak. If Megan wants to talk, so do I. I made a mistake, Megan said, tears welling up. Mistakes aren't just one-off events. They're a series of choices. Whether he seduced you or not doesn't matter. You slept with him and lost the right to call me your husband. You called it lovemaking, but that's just a way to justify your actions. Lovemaking, in a marriage, should be between us. We talked about this before we married. I warned you what would happen if you cheated. My mother cheated too. I gathered proof as soon as I realized what you were doing. Even if you had said no that night, I would have left. But you disrespected me and took all our money. No, I gave the money to my father. He still holds it. He'll sell it and give me most of the proceeds, Megan replied. You didn't deserve a chance, I said. Where do you live now? None of your business. Our children will choose who they spend special occasions with, Megan said, falling silent as she realized her words had no power to change my mind. Just sign the papers and move on, Sarah urged. He's moved on. We love each other and are building a new life together. I've supported him through this, and he's mine, heart and soul, Megan's lawyer added. We're done here. Just sign and end this. Your marriage is over. Sign and move on. He placed the papers in front of Megan, and with tears in her eyes, she signed. Do I need to stay? She asked quietly. No, you're free to go. You'll receive the decree by mail. Then we're done, I said, standing up with Sarah and leaving the room. I'm sorry, Ethan, Megan said softly. I'll always love you. Her apology was hollow now, but the words, I'll always love you, echoed in my mind. Despite the lingering impact of her words, the woman holding my hand was the one I truly loved. In just over a month, she would be my bride. Outside, my father, Grace, Alex, and Emily were waiting at the cafe. We made our way to the nearest pub, where we each grabbed a drink. As we settled in, I recounted the events of the court session. My family listened attentively, realizing I was doing most of the talking. What did she look like? Emily asked. Pretty rough. She's definitely showing her age, Sarah murmured. Did she sign the papers? My father asked. Yes, I confirmed, raising my glass. We all took a sip. I went through something similar with your mother, my dad said. I'm sure Megan said what she needed to, just like your mother did with me. Mom wasn't blaming me. She was just expressing her frustrations. Mom was always nagging you about working too much, Luke noted. Did Megan try to justify her actions? Yeah, the usual excuse. It was just lovemaking, I replied. What is it with these women claiming it was just lovemaking? Emily mused. I'm committed to my husband. If I want something, I turn to him. Grace blushed slightly. Well said, Emily, my father praised. Those are words to live by. And if he needs a little help, he knows what to do. Grace, that's my grandfather, Emily exclaimed, laughing. He's not dead, and neither am I, Grace retorted. I'm 65 and still very much alive. Your grandfather and I promised to be faithful after our failed marriages, my father shared. I'm just relieved it's almost over. Infidelity is unforgivable. If you were younger, I might have felt trapped, Grace reflected, glancing at my dad. But he's always supported me. We spent a few more days in Sydney, discussing plans with family. Emily and James agreed to move to Adelaide with us, while Luke was still considering it. Surprisingly, my sister reached out, coming alone with news of her own broken marriage. You can stay with us while you sort things out, Sarah offered warmly. Your family now, and my family is yours too. We're selling the house here and moving to Adelaide, I added. Housing prices are more reasonable there. We'll buy a big house for our growing family. Sarah placed my hand on her stomach. I'll be carrying our first child soon. How many kids do you want, Ethan? As many as you want, Jenny. I love being a dad, I replied. A month later, I received the divorce decree, officially ending my marriage to Megan Foster. I never heard from her again, but Luke, who was her sole contact, informed me she left Sydney within 6 months and relocated to Queensland to start fresh. After that, I stopped inquiring, and Luke ceased updating me. I had no interest in her whereabouts. Just 2 days after receiving the divorce papers, I proposed to Sarah on the beach, surrounded by our families. She was so overwhelmed that she could hardly speak as I slipped the engagement ring onto her finger. 6 months later, we were married on the same beach, near our new home.